Everyone, my name is Paula Borowska, and as Eric said, I am a PhD student here at CIS. Thank you very much for coming here to this very last panel and very last presentation, actually not the last one, today. So the title of my presentation is From Atheism to Choosing God and the Nation, the narratives on converting in the post-Soviet Belarus. Let me just start with a very short story how I arrived upon the study of this subject. Actually, it all happened by accident. When I was doing my PhD fieldwork in Belarus, I used to open my interviews with Protestants whom I was talking to, when I knew that they were converts, with the question, how did you convert? Why did you convert? So what's your story? That meant to be just a nice breaker, but actually in response I've heard long stories and quite interesting, because it's in this around 10 narratives it became clear that people, while searching for God, at some point, they search for God coincided with some nationalist or nationally charged motivations. So this is something which I completely did not anticipate. Actually, I should not. I should actually be ready for this finding, because many scholars argue that after the demise of the Soviet Union, many new elites actually try to give the national form to religion, and it's happened in many post-Soviet countries. For example, Ukraine. So religion and national form of religion, nationalization of religion, actually was a tool to some elite for mobilization and legitimization. So I call this phenomenon religious nationalism, and as scholars argue, it's usually something which appears among urban middle class people, and that was exactly the case which I came across doing my research. So basically the idea was to tightly knit Protestantism with the Belarusian national identity, and that would lead to something which I called national universe, Protestant national universe. So basically the idea was that many people would say that, look, in the Western Europe, the Reformation brought about so many good things. People, languages were emancipated. There was Protestant Christianity, and look, then we've got this national identity, strong national identity helped rulers to, at some point, to modernize and bring democratization in these countries. So the idea was basically that the same things could happen in Belarus. The same pattern could be the case of Belarus, that Protestant Christianity brought some new values, and a special role was here played by Belarusian language. So what we know about Belarusian identity now, many scholars argue that it's underdeveloped, weak, or even non-existent. Belarusians were often seen as the most Sovietized and Russified people in the Soviet Union. Language, which often remains a symbol of community and in fact helps define nations as entities of distinct bounded languages. In the case of Belarus, we can speak of something which is Nalibekov's called progressing assimilation with the Russian-speaking cultural universe. What's more, the choice of language itself in daily life, Belarus actually has become, to some extent, politicized, and also some scholars, Professor Wilson, argued in his book that none of the three main churches can act as a carrier of the Belarusian idea. And so when I was doing my interviews, I realized that there were actually two types of people. So there was one group of people who were converts, who were civil activists prior to conversion. They had quite strong national self-identification, usually, or were just speaking Belarusian language. And then at some point they were exposed to Protestants who influenced their religiosity, their converting. And the other group of people were people who began developing their Belarusian identity and the language, started speaking the language. And at the same time, actually, they identified the spiritual needs too. So they were looking for the right fit. They were looking for the right faith community, and came across Belarusian-speaking Protestant congregations. There were just a few of them in Minsk. So let's now come to some parts of from the interviews. So there was, for example, a very interesting story of Fyodor, aged 28, who was a civil society activist in the beginning of 2000. But actually, so he was just doing this kind of things which he believed was the best for Belarusians. He wanted to develop their identity. But at some point he was actually hanging out with Protestants, Belarusian-speaking Protestants, and he converted. But before converting actually, because he somehow felt that religion was needed for to be Belarusian, that was something which would strengthen actually Belarusianness. He was actually experimenting with different things. For example, with paganism. So that was something more, which is in the roots of Belarusianness, paganism. But later he decided he would just drop it off and rather stick to Protestants. There was also an interesting case of Vala, who wasn't a civil society activist in the 1990s, but she started speaking Belarusian language, and she was what people often said when I was interviewing, she was a conscious Belarusian, so a person who knew there was a history of Belarusian nation, there is a language, and she should be respectful of all of these things. And she also experimented with different Christian churches. She belonged to the Orthodox Church, then to the Unit Church, which is Catholic Church, and then actually, because of some ritual purity, she decided to join a Baptist congregation in Minsk. But it's quite interesting because when in this bit which you can read here, I asked her in what way she thinks her church could support the national awareness of Belarusians, and she says, "Oh, actually, no, this is not our role. We are just, we are learning about God, and that's it. I mean, this is not our job. This is the state job." However, then she in a way contradicts herself, saying that that God created various nations. He created borders, thus dividing somewhat people, nations. It is written in the Bible. So she started explaining, blending this sacrum and profane things, like blending how actually they've got the right from God to exist as a separate nation. Belarusian nation actually even said as a community created by God. There was also a story of Katya, who had some family problems, but at the same time in her life she realized she wanted to do something for her emerging Belarusianness. She was a very young girl when she joined the Protestant Belarusian-speaking congregation, and she badly needed some right faith community, so she could do both, good practice faith, pray, have a community, but at the same time actually do something for her Belarusian identity, to consolidate it, probably to find people like-minded. And she found this community, this congregation in Minsk, and apparently she is very happy to belong to this congregation, because what they do lots of culture related activities. So they try to teach about the Reformation. They try to teach how that the Reformation also reached Belarusian lands, and that could be actually good. Something also good if there will be more Protestantism in Belarus. That would be something good for the whole country, for the whole community, for the whole nation. And there was also a very interesting story of Vitaly, who was a civil society activist, political activist, even in the 1990s. He was already speaking Belarusian language, but then he also realized he realized his spiritual needs, and for some time he was actually attending both a Russian-speaking Protestant congregation and Belarusian-speaking group within a Catholic church. And so for this, I think 1 year, he couldn't really decide where he should belong to, whether that should be this community, Protestant community, or the Catholic church. But what he loved about this Catholic church was the music, was the fact that they used Belarusian language, but what he really liked about Protestants was that it was just so informal. So, but anyway, he decided to stick to this group within the Catholic church, which at some point actually became slightly too charismatic for the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church actually asked them to disconnect, to become more independent. So they are not anymore. They are not anymore part of the Catholic Church, but actually they become Protestant. So eventually Vitali also became Protestant. But he was clearly he was looking for this strong Belarusian language-related element in ritual too, in the community, in the presence of the community congregation too. Another person, Leonid, he was born in an atheist family, but he was also civil society activist and political activist in the 1990s. And his encounter with Christianity actually took place when he got the New Testament from a Calvinist pastor. So that was his first encounter, and as a result of this, as he said, I came to God, and he started to looking for a church for himself. He became Protestant. However, at some point, he decided that he wanted to become the Orthodox. So he sort of decided to drop off Protestantism for a few reasons. So when we speak of this impact of this Protestant nationalism, so I think although it seems that it's quite attractive in some for some people, for some Protestant circles. However, Protestants are religious minorities in Belarus. That would be one thing to probably to take into consideration, but also. What is, I think, something more serious here, so is that there are quite serious, significant discrepancies between various congregations, Protestant congregations in the country. So, for example, they can have various attitudes toward nation-related, politics-related, society-related issues. So, for example, those rural congregations, they are not necessarily in favor of doing national identity-related issues in their churches. Actually, they want to stay away from this sort of things. The same with politics. The same applies to broadly understood civil society issues. They would just rather do local issues which relate to their local communities, small communities. So that would be the case of this Protestant nationalism. Rather refers to a few congregations in Minsk, so middle-class Belarusians. And then finally, scholars argue that a relationship with the state is central in the process of constructing nationalism. So here we've got another issue, because actually many Protestants, especially those based in Minsk, often raise the issue of how complex this relationship with the authority is. So if this relationship is complex, is sometimes even non-existent, it's really difficult to do something more serious when it comes to national identity. So the outreach is much smaller. Also, the regional variety is quite important. So again, here we come back to the fact that people who are Protestant congregations in southwest Belarus, in rural areas, is a completely different community of believers than people who, for example, who are based in Minsk. So again, we don't have just one Protestantism. We've got multiple Protestantism. We don't have one Pentecostalism. We'll have like multiple Pentecostalisms in the country. So thank you very much for your attention. And this is my work in progress. So I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.